Wake up! Wake up, everybody! There's Dallas.
Here's how Dallas liked to see itself in the early 1960s. But here's another image projected across America. A city of right-wing extremists, virulent, sometimes violent.
It's not the individual person of Dallas. It's something evil, festering, stinking in this community.
What was happening in Dallas...
Bill Minutaglio co-authored the newly published book Dallas, 1963.
It was as if the temperature was being turned up month by month by month by month.
Dallas seemingly marched to a drumbeat of zealotry.
And now, speaking for Christ and against communism,
Anti-communist, anti-Kennedy. In 1960, Lyndon Johnson and his wife Lady Bird were mobbed in a Dallas hotel by a screaming crowd.
They were spitting at them, trying to hit them with signs. People were pulling hat pins out of their hats and trying to poke them at people. It was a melee.
Just weeks before the assassination, UN Ambassador Adlai Stevenson was shouted down during a Dallas appearance, and a protester struck him in the head with a sign. The mob was so agitated, Stevenson advised that the president should cancel his trip to the city.
Of honorary citizenship in this great city of Dallas.
Much of the anger came from supporters of a segregationist retired general named Edwin Walker, who had linked up with oil baron H.L. Hunt. Fortune magazine would later call the city's business leadership an oligarchy that had not done enough to isolate extremists.
In the name of God, what kind of city have we become?
Their silence created a vacuum that was soon filled by a minority, vocal group of extremists who vilified and demonized anyone who took a different point of view.
One night in April 1963, Edwin Walker was sitting in his home when a sniper's bullet barely missed striking him in the head. As it turned out, the rifle shot was fired by Lee Harvey Oswald, a Marxist whose relatives later said he wanted to earn a place in history.
I do believe Lee Harvey Oswald was influenced by this sense of danger and even impending violence that was swirling in Dallas.
the crowd yelled.
On the day President Kennedy arrived in Dallas, he told his wife they were headed into what he called nut country, and he talked to her about how easily he could be assassinated, specifically by a sniper perched in a Dallas office building. Somebody spread pamphlets that looked like wanted posters, accusing the president of treason. The Dallas Morning News published this full-page ad with a funereal black border accusing Kennedy of giving aid and comfort to communists.
And the people cheer.
Today, historians can compare the political mood of Dallas 1963 to the political mood of America 2013.
And you'll see many of the same things, this stridency, this vitriol, this yelling as opposed to a conversation, and it makes you wonder, sometimes how far we've progressed.
The presidential car moving out.
History would remember the harsh words in Dallas in a very harsh light. Doug Miller, KHOU 11 News.
I remember these too.
Just like so many other Americans who'd lived through those days, he saved the magazines.
This one is November '63.
But when Milton Wright looks at the pictures,
I was right there.
his memories come from a unique perspective.
No, I stopped right here.
There's Mrs. Kennedy.
When President Kennedy stepped off Air Force One at Love Field, he was met by a cheering crowd and by a couple of Texas lawmen assigned to drive cars in the president's motorcade. One of them was a Texas Ranger who would later become sheriff of Fort Bend County. Milton Wright didn't expect any trouble.
Oh yeah, it's very jovial, a lot of cheering and clapping and that kind of thing. Yeah, he was very popular. Disbelief, I really thought it was probably a big firecracker or something. Who'd believe something like that would happen in Texas? But then the second and third, there wasn't no doubt what it was.
And no doubt the gunfire came from the Texas School Book Depository. Wright heard the shots and unholstered his gun. But he didn't know how seriously the president had been injured until the motorcade arrived at Parkland Hospital.
His head was a lot of it was missing, and the agent pulled off his coat and covered the head with his coat because it was such a gruesome sight. And then we picked him up straight up, and the group in the car handed him over to a group on the ground and put him on the gurney, and went inside.
Did you know the president was dead?
Oh, yeah, well, no doubt.
As the terrible events of that day unfolded, as a new president was sworn in aboard Air Force One, Wright ended up back at Love Field.
And that was the first time I got, had, I guess, any feeling about the thing. But it's very, very chilling, cold, that this was happening in the United States.
Now the retired Texas Ranger and retired sheriff keeps mementos of his decades in law enforcement.
Next page.
And like so many other Americans, he keeps the magazines and the memories from an unforgettable week in American history. In Richmond, Doug Miller, KHOU 11 News.
And I don't keep house very well.
Welcome to the messy office of Dr. Red Duke.
What the hell is that thing?
Ask him about the stuff on his walls, and he'll tell you stories.
This guy up here, his name is Abdul Ghaffur. He was called the Frontier Gandhi.
And he has a lifetime of stories.
Because I've always been kind of a little troublemaker. But I guess I'm a pretty good outlaw.
But for all the mementos crammed into this small room, there's no souvenir from the most remarkable day of a most remarkable life.
Everyone knew where they were the day they heard it, or what they were doing. And that's true of anybody of that generation.
November 22, 1963. President Kennedy's breakfast meeting with the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce was carried live on local television. But at Parkland Hospital, a fourth-year surgery resident named Red Duke wasn't paying much attention.
I don't think I was even hardly conscious of the fact that the president and his wife were going to be there.
At noon, Dealey Plaza erupted in chaos. 6 minutes later, the president's motorcade arrived at Parkland, and someone told Red Duke to head for the emergency room.
And I thought, being a typical country boy, I thought, golly, I'm going to get to meet a president.
Then he walked into the trauma room.
And I saw these people standing there, and then I saw Mrs. Kennedy seated by the door, and her clothing was stained, and I realized that this was not a good deal.
As crowds gathered outside the hospital, doctors feverishly worked on the president's lifeless body.
I right quick recognized that this was a fatal injury, and I have no idea what I said, but they said, well, there's a guy across the hall needs some help.
I knew I'd been hit badly.
The guy across the hall turned out to be Texas Governor John Connally, seriously wounded by an assassin's bullet.
And I said, my God, they're going to kill us all.
But he lived to tell the story after he was treated by a young Dr. Red Duke.
It's so surreal that it doesn't make sense. That it's like an out-of-body experience. That, yeah, I was there and did all this stuff.
Now, on a wall of his cluttered office hangs a picture painted by his daughter. She was 3 years old that day. Her father can still recite what she said that night for a dinner prayer.
The words that came out of her mouth was, "The world is dark and we are very sad." That a 3-year-old could be so, it just recognized how smart little kids are.
Of all the mementos in his office, nothing from that day. It's one story. A man with a lifetime of stories doesn't care much to tell. Doug Miller, KHOU 11 News. Where Texas crosses Main Street in downtown Houston, history happened.
It was an event you can't forget.
Ernest Aguirre cherishes his photographs because he was there on the last night of Camelot.
Gosh, they're both so full of life.
So full of life on a night that would make political history. The mariachis on stage that evening had good reason to celebrate. President Kennedy had accepted an almost last-minute invitation to drop by a LULAC meeting at the Rice Hotel.
Well, I'm glad to be here today, and in order that my words would be even clearer, I'm going to ask my wife to say a few words to you also.
The president didn't say much. He didn't have to. He left the talking to his wife.
Oy vey. You can't describe it. She's just a gorgeous woman. She was a gorgeous woman.
A gorgeous first lady who happened to speak Spanish.
Estoy muy contenta de estar en el gran estado de Texas.
It wasn't what she said, just a few pleasantries that electrified the crowd.
Ah!
It was that maybe the most glamorous woman in the world was here in Houston, speaking to a LULAC meeting in Spanish.
Everybody just made more noise. I don't know why this Rice Hotel is still there, because it should have crumbled down with the noise that was there.
Kennedy visited with LULAC members here at the Rice Hotel for only 17 minutes. Yes, they timed it, because even then they knew that this would be a transformative moment in the history of Latino politics. The pictures people took that night captured what you could call the coming out party of the Latino vote.
Yes, it was. Historically, it's the first time ever that a sitting American president has ever appeared and spoke before a predominantly Latino organization.
But LULAC leaders now acknowledge this historic event was orchestrated on a clever ruse. Just a month earlier, a LULAC leader had written this letter to the White House.
We can win in Texas, it's underlined,
inviting the president to drop by a LULAC state directors meeting that happened to coincide with his visit to Houston. What the White House didn't know was that LULAC hastily organized this previously unplanned meeting solely to coax the president into coming over to pay his respects and shine a spotlight on the emerging importance of Latino voters. They made this meeting up to meet Kennedy, huh?
Exactly. And it worked.
And the president of the...
A day later, Camelot would come to an abrupt end. But on the last night of his life, the doomed president helped give birth to the Latino vote. In downtown Houston, Doug Miller, KHOU 11 News.